Hey there, this is Mr. Usher doing another recording for you guys. This is for my full credit class. I know I've been a little behind on these for those of you who actually maybe occasionally pop in and watch these. But yeah, I wanted to do a recording for our lesson that we had on May 11th, Wednesday, May 11th. That was on, as you can see here, eating disorders. So it's a very serious subject. I will say right off the bat, it can be kind of disturbing and disgusting and unsettling for a lot of people. So if you're kind of squeamish, fair warning, you need to pace yourself or maybe avert yourself during certain portions. It's understandable. What we did during the first part of this, other thing I wanted to mention, eating disorders are distinct amongst mental illnesses for their direct lethality, by which I mean they kill you directly, right? Sure, you might get suicidal from being depressed, and then that suicide is the cause of your death, or maybe you're so anxious that you raise your blood pressure, and that causes a heart disease, which kills you. Those kind of things can happen, which is why mental health in general is important. But eating disorders are really the only ones where the direct behavior of the disorder is your cause of death. You eat so little that you starve to death. You eat so much that your body can't handle it and shuts down, something like that. So very deadly and therefore should be taken very, very seriously, right? Anyway, first thing we did is take a look at these two items here. These are two scales that are used to assess people potentially for eating disorders, right? So one of them, because so many of these psychologists like to give clever names to these scales, is called the Eating Attitudes Test, or EAT-26 for short. Basically breaks it into three sections. There's one objective section, I like to call it, and then two subjective sections. By objective and subjective, in this case, I mean for objective, these are things that can be measured in numbers, right, or have kind of an inherent solid truth to them, right? They're not a matter of opinion, right? They are, just established facts. Right? The only one that might be a little bit more subjective, right, is this question 7 here, ideal weight. But yeah, your birth date, your height, your current weight, obviously it's important. Even I would argue, right, your gender, male or female, setting aside, biological sex for a second and looking at gender identity. Most people don't just have like a gender that randomly goes in one way or the other. Or if they do, that is kind of their established identity. If they're gender fluid, that's kind of their established identity. It's not something that they just pick or make up or something like that, right? Anyway, other two sections are subjective in nature. So you have these questions just asking you the degree to which you maybe agree with these statements, right? So these are more like attitudes towards eating, right? Maybe you are constantly aware of the calorie count of food. Maybe you take longer than others to eat meals. Maybe you engage in dieting behavior, some of which are normal things to do, right? But then there are other things like, let's see, what else do we have here? I feel extremely guilty after eating. That's definitely a little concerning. Then these ones here are more concrete behaviors, right? Have you gone on eating binges where you feel like you might not be able to stop? Have you lost 20 pounds or more in the past 6 months, which is considered extreme? Have you tried using laxatives, diet pills, or diuretics, like things that make you urinate a lot, to control your weight? These kind of things. So concrete behaviors, things that you actually do in the world, right? Anyway, so that's the one scale. Other scale is a little bit non-obvious here, and that is the Compulsive Exercise Test. Basically, describing exactly what it is. It's looking to see if people have behaviors that could be considered compulsive exercising. Now, why would we be concerned about this when talking about eating disorders? Because health, fitness, or an extreme obsession with these are often an underlying theme for eating disorders, right? So getting a sense of, the attitudes and behaviors that a person has towards exercise can give us, a clearer idea of whether or not somebody has a problematic eating disorder, right? So similarly, like you want to rate each statement based on the degree to which these things are true for you, right? So for instance, I exercise to improve my appearance. Maybe a little problematic, but not that bad. Let's see. If I feel like I've eaten too much, I will do more exercise. Also, maybe a little concerning. If I cannot exercise, I feel low or depressed. That's definitely getting more concerning, right? The direct mental health issue there. Let's see, what else do we have here? I usually continue to exercise despite injury unless I am very ill or too injured, right? So you're kind of like pushing through an injury, which is not good for your health, obviously, right? If you sprain your ankle running and then continue to try to run, that's problematic, right? You're harming yourself. That's a danger. So anyway, so that's this one. Just kind of wanted you to take a look at those items. We discussed them a little bit as a class, that kind of a thing. What do we have here? So next I showed some clips from an episode of the 2000s Disney Channel show Lizzie Mcguire. In this particular episode, the main character, Lizzie Mcguire, is very concerned about her friend Miranda because she thinks something is wrong with her and that something happens to be an eating disorder. They don't specify exactly which one, but, you know, it clearly is a problematic eating and some kind of eating disorder, right? So I don't really have the clips available here because they didn't have regular access. I had to use my Disney Plus account from home for this. If you're very curious about it, I can try to show you sometime at school if you want. But very basically, there are 3 parts to this episode that I showed. In the first one, we see that Miranda is kind of really insecure about getting, you know, less than perfect grades. She got like only a B+ on a test, and she freaked out about it. Then she looked at a picture of herself that was being taken, actually a still from a video they were making for a class project. And she was like, oh no, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I have like 6 chins. And, you know, her friends are, of course, like, what are you talking about? You look fine. Like, but, you know, she impulsively decides, okay, I'm going on a diet, right? And then kind of from that point forward, she seems to eat nothing or next to nothing. The episode seems to take place over the course of like a few days. And she lies to parents and stuff. You know, for instance, she tells her friends at school lunch that, you know, oh, she's not hungry because she had a big breakfast. And then later that day, she tells Lizzie's mom, like, oh, yeah, I'm not hungry. I had a big lunch. When, of course, she didn't eat any lunch, right? So that's like the middle clip there. She actually faints in this middle clip while practicing dance moves for this video, right? A common symptom of a lot of eating disorders, especially ones involving purging or expelling stuff from your body. Also becomes very dehydrated, needs some water. And then finally, in the final clip, we kind of get to the kicker of this, right, which is kind of what's going on in her head. And she kind of reveals that she feels this sense of kind of constant pressure and control all around her. She feels like her parents and everybody is expecting her to do so great on things, and she doesn't have any control over her life. And she's worried about her future. All this kind of, you know, normal teen pressure that's just getting to be like too much for her, right? And so her rationale is basically, well, like, I feel like I can't control almost anything in my life, but at least I can control my eating, right? So that kind of pressure and like environment of hyper control is often a precursor to an eating disorder, as we'll see in this PowerPoint here. If you don't recognize the gentleman in this first slide, it is Dr. House from the hit TV show House. He often engages in a differential diagnosis, and hopefully you remember that a differential diagnosis is basically this critical thinking exercise we engage in to make sure the diagnosis we think a person warrants is really the right one, right? Because otherwise we might misdiagnose them, and if we misdiagnose them, we might give them the wrong treatment. So anyway, basic things. All people make occasional bad eating decisions. You eat a little too much, you eat something with too much sugar or too much fat. But eating disorders happen if people have a regular hypoconsumption or hypoconsumption, so eating way too much or eating way too little, right? It's typically caused by a combination of biology, such as maybe like a bad link between like parts of your brain and parts of your gut or digestive system, right? It's maybe sending the wrong signals. And socialization, right? So strict gender roles, especially for women, unfortunately, can be a part of it, right? We're expecting way too much of them in terms of how they should look and how skinny they should be. It's really problematic. Again, deadly disorders, so please take that seriously, please. Symptoms are both subjective and objective, right, as you kind of saw on that scale. So, you know, say just being terrified of becoming overweight, yeah, that can be a symptom of an eating disorder. But also we want to look at like a BMI, which is a body mass index, kind of the ratio of like your height to your weight, right? So if you're, say, for example, I'm about 6 feet tall, right? I should, you know, ideally, according to this body mass index scale, be a little bit heavier than I am. So, you know, I'm a little bit underweight because of that, according to the BMI. Being a little bit underweight isn't a problem, just like being a little bit overweight also is not a problem. But if you get into these extremes, that's a concern, right? And you'll see that in the next slide here. because we're going to discuss these 3 disorders, anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating, starting with the first, which is anorexia. If I were to sum up anorexia in a single image, probably be this, right? It's a cartoon, but, it shows this hyper skinny woman who looks in the mirror and sees somebody who's ugly and fat, right? Which is unrealistic, right? They also have a depiction of BMI, for some reason looking kind of like Slender Man. So that's a cartoon. It kind of represents this distorted body image that the person with anorexia has. To see an actual depiction of extreme anorexia, I have a real human being here. Fair warning to people who are squeamish, this is kind of the tough part. So pause here or look away if you don't want to see it. Here goes. Yes, so this woman has a very extreme form of anorexia, is severely underweight. I believe this woman in the picture is somewhere around 50 pounds. Also, you might notice that she's, she's extremely skeletal, which also means her muscle mass is, extremely small. And that's a problem because she literally did not have enough muscle strength to walk herself to that couch that she's sitting on in this picture. Assistant who was shooting the part of the documentary crew that was doing a documentary about this disorder had to actually physically carry her onto the couch. So, yeah, that's how bad it can get. Anyway, symptoms. You have an obsession with thinness, health, and fitness. Despite your excessive thinness, you believe yourself to be fat and ugly. There's overall a restriction in bodily energy, right? So all the things in your body that require energy, eating, exercising, sex, kind of engaging in activities, paying attention, all these things start to shut down. So your body just starts to go into like almost a permanent state of catatonia. It's very gradual, but yeah, it's also very serious. So there are 2 subtypes. There's the type where you binge and purge. You eat like a ton of food and then you get rid of it. But the idea here, right, is that if I eat, say, I don't know, a pound of food in a meal, which is actually, a little bit more than you should be eating in an average meal. If I eat a pound of food in a meal, I'm purging, 2.5, 3 pounds, right? So I'm putting out more than I'm taking in, which, obviously leads to a problem eventually. There's also just the restricting type, which I believe this woman suffered from, where you just eat very little food. If you're eating anything else, maybe very tiny portions, like, a cracker or a few peas or something like that. So high beauty standards, genetic predispositions, these things can be causes for this disorder, but also a restrictive home life, kind of like I talked about with Miranda and Lizzie Mcguire. This need for feeling like you can control something in your life can lead to this extreme behavior, this extreme compulsion, really. You can treat it, thankfully, with therapy, often family therapy, to address these problematic family structures. Behavioral conditioning can very gradually get people to eat more and more food. Medication doesn't typically help, right? It might help treat some comorbid things. If you get depression or anxiety related to the eating disorder, which is pretty common, it can help with those, but not with like the eating itself, or the lack of eating, rather. Anyway, the next one is bulimia nervosa. So, characterized by throwing up a lot. You purge your meals, right? But the ratio is more even, right? It's more 1-to-1 in terms of, eating and purging, or even eating and then like half purging, right? That's because people with bulimia tend to have a pretty regular weight. They will not end up like that woman, in the previous picture, right? They basically have brief periods where they're binging, then they feel a strong compulsion to purge, right? Usually by vomiting, but sometimes with laxatives, so, the other end. They generally maintain a normal body weight, though, which can make it hard to tell if they actually have the disorder. Actually, the medical professional that is probably best equipped to detect this is a dentist. That's because they can see that the enamel is wearing away from your teeth because of all the stomach acid that's coming up through your body and wearing it away. We're not typically supposed to have a lot of stomach acid coming on our teeth. It's supposed to stay in our stomachs for the most part. Anyway, genes can also cause this. Hormones seem to have an effect, which is maybe why women are a bit more likely to have it. Being just chronically afraid of being fat can be part of it, and just this need for perfectionism is also an issue. So we can treat this with cognitive behavioral therapy to help with distorted thoughts about food and body weight, and to condition healthier eating habits. Family therapy can really help, again, for like this perfectionist attitude. And actually, in this case, medicines, particularly SSRIs, which are a type of antidepressant, they can actually help a bit with bulimia, which is, a difference from anorexia. Again, why the differential diagnosis is so important. Binge eating is probably the simplest one to understand. It's basically like this, right? This is what's going on in the person's head. frequent binging with no purging, right? Excessive